Henry Walker, 62, had spent most of his life tracking animals through these same woods. Even after retirement, the forest remained the only place that kept his mind settled. Every evening, just before the sun disappeared behind the ridge, he took the same quiet walk along a narrow trail behind his cabin. The air that evening was cool and steady. A slow wind moved through the tall pines, carrying the scent of damp earth. Henry listened to the familiar sounds, the soft rustle of needles, the distant call of an owl, and the gentle flow of the creek somewhere deeper in the trees. These were the sounds that had become part of his life, steady and calming. But as he continued along the trail, he noticed something that made him stop. Silence. Not the calm silence he knew, but a heavy, unnatural one. No birds shifting in branches, no insects humming. Even the creek seemed quieter, as if holding its breath. Henry tightened his grip on his walking stick. Years of experience told him the forest only went quiet like this when something unusual had passed through. His steps slowed, senses sharp, heartbeat steady but alert. The sky above him dimmed to a soft gold as the last light faded. Henry scanned the trees, feeling a quiet unease settle into his chest. He wasn't frightened, just aware. At his age, he didn't ignore signs like this. He took a deeper breath, reminding himself that the forest had its own moods, but tonight felt different. As he walked farther into the stillness, he murmured under his breath, "Something's off tonight." And with that simple thought, the peaceful walk that Henry expected slowly shifted into something he could not yet understand. Henry had taken no more than 20 steps when he heard something faint drifting through the trees. He stopped again, tilting his head slightly. At first, he thought it was the wind shifting, but the sound came again, soft, thin, and trembling. A cry. Not human, not exactly animal, something in between. He stayed still, letting the forest settle around him. Years in the wilderness had taught him that moving too fast only scattered clues. The sound came again, this time a little clearer. It echoed from somewhere ahead, deeper down the slope where the land dipped into a narrow ravine. Henry frowned. Animals cried when they were trapped, injured, or separated, but he had never heard a tone like this, fragile, shaky, almost panicked. He tightened the strap of his old canvas jacket and stepped off the main trail, moving toward the sound. The ground slanted sharply downward, covered in loose soil and small rocks. At 62, he no longer moved like he once did, but his footing remained steady. Every step was careful, controlled, guided by the instincts he had built over decades. The cry echoed again. This time, Henry felt it in his chest. He muttered quietly, "Easy now. I'm coming." He didn't know why he said it, but the sound felt too desperate to ignore. He lowered himself, down a steeper patch of earth, gripping a tree trunk for balance. The forest remained unnervingly quiet except for that trembling call rising every few seconds. It wasn't loud, more like something trying, and failing, to be brave. As Henry reached the bottom of the slope, the air grew colder. The ravine funneled the chill, and his breath came out in thin puffs. He paused, listening again. The cries were clearer now, coming from somewhere ahead, soft, shaking, irregular. Not the sound of a predator, not the sound of something dangerous, more like something scared. He crouched low and moved toward the edge of a fallen log. Beyond it, the forest narrowed into a shadowed pocket where the ground dipped even deeper. Then the cry came again, closer than before, trembling with fear. Henry's heart pushed a little harder in his chest. Whatever was down there, it wasn't just hurt, it was terrified, and something in that fear pulled him forward, step by step, as he whispered to the silence, "Hang in there. I hear you." He didn't know it yet, but those faint cries were about to lead him into a moment he would remember for the rest of his life. Henry stepped past the fallen log, his boots sinking slightly into the damp earth. The faint cries were now steady, still trembling, still frightened, but close enough that he could finally tell they were coming from the stream ahead. The ravine opened into a narrow clearing where a shallow ribbon of water flowed quietly over smooth stones. Then he saw movement. At first, he thought it was just branches shifting in the wind. But the forest was still too still. He took a few careful steps forward, lowering himself to see beneath the pile of broken limbs and heavy rocks scattered near the stream bed. His breath caught. Two small shapes were huddled together, squeezed tightly between fallen branches and a thick slab of stone that had pinned part of the mess down. Tiny heads, covered in soft, dark brown fur, trembled with each faint cry. Their arms were short, their hands small but shaped unmistakably like the hands of something half-human. Their chests rose and fell quickly, breaths fast and panicked. Bigfoot infants, 2 of them. Henry froze where he stood, not from fear, but from the shock of seeing something so young, so helpless, and so clearly not meant to be alone. The babies noticed him. Their wide amber eyes blinked through wet lashes. Instead of screaming or trying to pull away, they simply stared, frightened, shivering, exhausted beyond the strength to fight. Henry lowered himself slowly to one knee. "Easy. I'm not here to hurt you," he said softly. His voice barely rose above the quiet trickle of the stream. He kept his hands visible, fingers spread slightly, showing he meant no harm. The babies whimpered, their small bodies pressing closer together for comfort. The sight hit Henry harder than he expected. In all his years outdoors, he had stumbled across injured animals, abandoned, fawns, even lost dogs, but nothing like this. These 2 weren't just trapped, they were running out of time. Their breaths were shallow, their limbs trembling from cold and fear. Another hour, maybe less, and the night chill would finish what the fallen branches had started. He swallowed the tightness in his throat. "All right. Let's get you out of there," he whispered. He reached out slowly, testing the weight of the top branches. The infants didn't pull back. They simply watched him, eyes wide, shining with fear but mixed with something else too. Trust. Not much of it, but enough. Henry worked carefully, shifting the lighter branches off first, making sure the movement didn't startle them. Each time he lifted a piece of wood or rock, the babies flinched but didn't cry out. They were too tired for that. When he finally freed enough space for his hands to reach them, he paused and met their eyes again. "You're gonna be all right," he said softly, almost like a promise, and in that moment, he knew one thing with certainty. If he walked away, these little ones wouldn't survive the night. Henry couldn't let that happen. Henry leaned closer, keeping his movements slow and steady. The first baby was trapped under only a few thin branches, and he cleared those with careful hands. Once the last piece shifted aside, the little one let out a tiny whimper and tried to curl inward. Henry slipped one arm beneath its small body. The fur was soft but cold, the muscles weak from shivering. The infant tensed for a moment, then relaxed against his warmth, too exhausted to resist. "There you go. You're all right now," Henry murmured. He set the first baby gently on a patch of moss close to him, keeping a hand on its back to let it feel his presence. But the second infant's situation was worse. Its right leg was pinned tightly under a heavier log, the kind that would take careful handling. Henry examined it closely. If he lifted too fast or from the wrong angle, he could injure the baby even more. He looked around and spotted a sturdy branch lying nearby. Years in the wilderness had taught him how to use leverage, even with aging muscles. He slid the branch under the log, wedging it deep into the soil for support. Then he leaned his weight slowly, easing the log upward inch by inch. The baby whimpered in pain. "I know. Just hold on," Henry whispered. With a final push, the log shifted high enough to free the small leg. Henry reached in quickly and pulled the infant into his arms before lowering the log back down safely. When he held the second baby, it clung weakly to his jacket, trembling hard from fear and cold. Henry sat back on his heels, both infants now pressed close to him. Their tiny hands gripped whatever they could, his sleeve, his collar, the edge of his shirt. Instinct, pure and simple. He knew cold could take them fast. Without hesitating, he unzipped his heavy jacket, pulled it around both babies, and wrapped them against his chest. Their shivering eased slightly as his body heat reached them. "You're safe now," he said gently, a quiet, fatherly tone falling naturally into his voice. He didn't know who they belonged to. He didn't know how they ended up trapped, but none of that mattered in the moment. All he knew was that these two tiny lives depended entirely on him. And Henry Walker wasn't about to let them fade. With both infants wrapped securely inside his jacket, Henry shifted his weight and prepared to climb back up the slope. The ravine was cold, the shadows growing longer, and the babies needed warmth and safety. He tightened his hold on them and rose slowly to his feet. That was when he felt it. The forest changed. Just minutes earlier, the woods had been unnaturally quiet. Now the silence deepened into something heavier, something that pressed down on Henry like a weight. Even the small stream seemed to hush itself, as if the entire ravine knew something was approaching. Henry turned slightly, scanning the ridge above. Nothing moved, but he could feel it, an awareness settling over the trees, thick and watchful. Then came the first sound, a deep, muffled thud, then another. Heavy footsteps, slow, intentional. They echoed from the slope above him, each one sending a slight vibration through the ground. Henry's heart tightened, but he did not panic. At his age, he had learned long ago that fear clouded judgment. Instead, he steadied his breathing. The babies reacted before he did. Both little bodies pressed hard against his chest, gripping his shirt with surprising strength. One buried its face under his collar, the other tucked its head under his chin. Henry whispered softly, "Easy. I've got you." He looked toward the tree line above, one hand shifting automatically to protect the infants. The footsteps grew clearer, no longer random. They were deliberate, and whoever or whatever was making them was coming straight toward him. A low rumbling sound rolled through the trees, not a growl, not a roar, something deeper, something that felt more like a warning than a threat, the kind of sound a parent would make when searching for its young. Henry exhaled slowly. "So, you're not alone after all," he murmured. He didn't move. He didn't run. Running would only make things worse. Instead, he stood still in the center of the ravine, holding the infants close, knowing that whoever was coming would already smell them, hear them, sense them. The forest held its breath as the last light faded from the sky. Henry braced himself quietly. He was no longer alone, and whatever stepped out next would change everything. Henry took a deep breath and began climbing out of the ravine, careful not to jostle the babies tucked against his chest. The slope was steep, but he moved with controlled steadiness, gripping roots and rocks as he worked his way upward. The forest above remained silent, but the footsteps had not vanished. They were waiting. When Henry reached the top and stepped onto level ground, he froze. He was surrounded. 8, maybe 10 of them. Tall, broad-shouldered figures stood in a wide circle around him, their dark fur blending with the fading light. Some were nearly 8 feet tall. Others stood slightly shorter, but all held the same alert posture, their deep-set eyes fixed on Henry. They didn't charge. They didn't roar. They simply watched. Henry kept both hands around the babies, not hiding them, but not offering them either. His stance stayed calm, respectful, steady, showing no threat but no fear. A soft rustle moved through the group as one figure stepped forward. The leader. Even among the others, he was massive, well over 8 feet, with broad shoulders and thick arms marked by age and strength. A long, old scar crossed his chest, pale against the deep brown fur. His face held a stillness that wasn't hostile, but heavy with meaning. And his amber eyes, they carried something layered and deep. Henry felt the babies shift inside his jacket. Then a small, trembling cry escaped, one of them soft but desperate. The second baby followed with a weak whimper. The effect was immediate. The tribe's posture changed, shoulders lowered, tension eased. The circle, once tight with caution, now softened into something else entirely: recognition. The leader's chest rose with a slow inhale. His eyes locked on the infants clinging to Henry. A low, rumbling sound rolled from him. Not a warning this time, but something sorrowful, something relieved. Henry swallowed gently, feeling the weight of the moment settle around him. "I didn't take them," he said quietly. "I pulled them out of a trap down there." He didn't know if they understood the words, but they understood his tone. One of the babies stretched a tiny hand toward the tribe, fingers trembling. The leader stepped closer, slow and controlled, lowering himself slightly so he didn't tower over Henry. Their eyes met man and guardian. Recognition became understanding, and the forest, for the first time that night, breathed again. Henry stayed perfectly still, holding the infants close against his chest. Every muscle in his body was tense, yet controlled, as he waited for whatever was coming next. But then, something completely unexpected happened. A figure emerged from the shadows of the forest behind the leader, a smaller, more delicate figure. The mother. She moved slowly, shaking, almost trembling from the sheer force of emotion. Her eyes were wide, amber, glowing faintly in the dim light, and every step seemed hesitant, uncertain, yet urgent. She reached forward with long, fur-covered arms, stretching toward the babies in Henry's hold. Henry kneeled immediately, lowering himself to make his height less intimidating. He let the mother approach, hands still protecting the infants but relaxed enough to show he meant no harm. The babies stirred, whimpering softly, and pressed toward their mother instinctively. The mother's eyes locked on Henry for the briefest moment. Then she laid one gentle hand on his forearm, soft but firm. It was a touch filled with recognition, gratitude, and trust. Henry felt a warmth spread through his chest, a quiet affirmation that his actions had been understood without a single word spoken. The tribe shifted behind her. Shoulders, once tense, relaxed. Some members leaned forward slightly, low, humming sounds emanating from deep within their throats. It was a sound Henry had never heard before. Yet it carried a clear message: relief, thanks, and the unspoken acknowledgement that he had done the right thing. Henry exhaled slowly, his heartbeat steadying. There was no fear here, no hostility, only a deep, unspoken connection, forged in a moment of crisis and care. The babies stirred again, reaching for their mother, and she bent down, pulling them gently from Henry's jacket. He watched as they pressed against her chest, small arms wrapping around her neck. The mother's eyes flicked to Henry once more, lingering just long enough to convey everything words could not. Then she straightened, turning back toward the forest, leading her family silently. Henry stayed on his knees, watching, the weight of the encounter settling gently over him. Relief and peace replaced the tension. For a fleeting moment, he felt part of something larger than himself, a bond that transcended species and fear. The forest exhaled alongside him, soft wind brushing the trees. And in that quiet, Henry understood something simple yet profound. Compassion had spoken louder than fear. Henry stayed perfectly still, holding the infants close against his chest. Every muscle in his body was tense, yet controlled, as he waited for whatever was coming next. But then, something completely unexpected happened. A figure emerged from the shadows of the forest behind the leader, a smaller, more delicate figure. The mother. She moved slowly, shaking, almost trembling from the sheer force of emotion. Her eyes were wide, amber glowing faintly in the dim light, and every step seemed hesitant, uncertain, yet urgent. She reached forward with long, fur-covered arms, stretching toward the babies in Henry's hold. Henry kneeled immediately, lowering himself to make his height less intimidating. He let the mother approach, hands still protecting the infants but relaxed enough to show he meant no harm. The babies stirred, whimpering softly, and pressed toward their mother instinctively. The mother's eyes locked on Henry for the briefest moment. Then she laid one gentle hand on his forearm, soft but firm. It was a touch filled with recognition, gratitude, and trust. Henry felt a warmth spread through his chest, a quiet affirmation that his actions had been understood without a single word spoken. The tribe shifted behind her. Shoulders, once tense, relaxed. Some members leaned forward slightly. Low, humming sounds emanating from deep within their throats. It was a sound Henry had never heard before, yet it carried a clear message: relief, thanks, and the unspoken acknowledgement that he had done the right thing. Henry exhaled slowly, his heartbeat steadying. There was no fear here, no hostility, only a deep, unspoken connection, forged in a moment of crisis and care. The babies stirred again, reaching for their mother, and she bent down, pulling them gently from Henry's jacket. He watched as they pressed against her chest, small arms wrapping around her neck. The mother's eyes flicked to Henry once more, lingering just long enough to convey everything words could not. Then she straightened, turning back toward the forest, leading her family silently. Henry stayed on his knees, watching, the weight of the encounter settling gently over him. Relief and peace replaced the tension. For a fleeting moment, he felt part of something larger than himself, a bond that transcended species and fear. The forest exhaled alongside him, soft wind brushing the trees, and in that quiet, Henry understood something simple yet profound. Compassion had spoken louder than fear. The mother Bigfoot cradled her babies against her chest, her arms firm yet gentle. The tribe moved subtly, forming a loose circle around Henry, their postures calm but vigilant. The air was heavy with quiet energy, a tension unlike any Henry had experienced before. Yet it was not fear, it was awareness, respect, and the weight of something older than words. Henry held his ground, still kneeling, hands relaxed but ready to shield the infants if necessary. The forest seemed to lean closer, every leaf and branch holding its breath. Then the leader stepped forward, slow, measured, each movement deliberate, showing strength but also a calm restraint. His amber eyes never left Henry's, and the scar across his chest was highlighted by the soft fading light. The sound he made was low, almost imperceptible at first, a deep, resonant hum that carried through the trees. It was not a growl or a warning. It was deliberate, purposeful, a gesture of recognition, a gesture of respect. Henry's heart thudded, but he did not move hastily. He understood instinctively. This was a moment beyond speech, beyond reasoning. It was ancient, primal, and deeply human in its meaning. The leader acknowledged him not as a threat, not as prey, but as someone who had acted with care. Henry nodded slowly, a subtle tilt of his head, a quiet acknowledgement of their communication. It was all he needed. No words were exchanged, and yet a profound understanding passed between them. He felt the same pulse that had guided him through years in the wilderness, the silent code that connected living things, the unspoken language of empathy and survival. The other members of the tribe relaxed slightly. Some emitted soft, low hums, vibrations that Henry could feel in his chest, gentle and affirming. They were neither aggressive nor fearful. The forest around them remained still, shadows stretching long over the undergrowth, bathed in the dim light of the setting sun. Henry's gaze remained fixed on the mother and the leader. He felt awe, gratitude, and a quiet humility. In that moment, all distinctions, human and Bigfoot, old and young, melted away. Only understanding remained, only connection. He realized he would never forget this silent exchange, this moment when trust and compassion bridged two worlds without a single word spoken. The mother, Bigfoot, still holding her babies, began moving deeper into the forest. The tribe followed in a slow, silent procession, each step deliberate, careful not to disturb the fragile peace of the ravine. The forest seemed to exhale around them, the tension lifting like a fog in the morning sun. Henry remained kneeling where he had been, watching every movement. He felt no fear now, only quiet awe. The leader paused midway, turning slowly to glance back at him. His amber eyes held something Henry had not expected: gratitude. Deep, measured, and unmistakable. A silent acknowledgement of what had just transpired. The scarred chest, once intimidating, now radiated calm authority. Henry nodded in return, letting them know he understood. The babies stirred in their mother's arms, tiny hands reaching outward toward him one last time. Henry felt the weight of connection as he pressed a gentle, fleeting touch to the air between them. He could not hold them, could not follow them into the forest. Yet this small gesture carried all the meaning words could never convey. Slowly, the group disappeared into the shadows of the dense trees. Branches brushed softly against one another as the forest embraced them back into its depths. Henry remained still, the fading sounds of footsteps and soft hums lingering in his ears like the echo of a dream. The evening air carried the memory of their presence, and for the first time that night, the ravine felt completely empty and yet profoundly full. Henry rose to his feet, shoulders heavy with relief, heart quietly full. He would remember this night forever. A bond had been formed, one born of trust, care, and understanding that transcended words or species. The forest was alive, the babies were safe, and he had witnessed something extraordinary. In the silence, Henry whispered softly to himself, "I'll never forget you." Bittersweet peace settled over him as he turned back toward his cabin, carrying with him a memory that would last a lifetime. That night, Henry sat on the worn wooden porch of his cabin, the forest dark and still around him. The air was cool, carrying the faint scent of pine and earth. He rocked gently in his chair, replaying every detail of the encounter, every glance, every soft sound, every small gesture that had spoken volumes without words. He realized something profound. The tribe hadn't just trusted him. They had understood him. They had seen his intentions clearly, the quiet, steady care he had given to the infants, and responded not with fear, but with recognition. It was a connection that transcended words, a silent bond between living beings that few humans ever experience. Henry thought of how rare genuine connection was, especially in a life like his where so much had been routine, predictable, quiet. Yet tonight had reminded him that trust, empathy, and care still existed in their purest form. He let out a slow breath and whispered to the forest, "Respect is the language of life, and sometimes the unseen world teaches it better than any of us could ever learn." And with that, he leaned back, letting the night's calm settle around him, knowing the memory would stay forever.